Hello my sweet friends, welcome back. I thought since we're a little over halfway through the year, now would be a perfect time to talk about some of my favorite books that I've read in the first half of 2023. Today we are going to be talking about all things romance, which is so fun. I'm definitely a romance and fantasy girly. Those are the two genres that I tend to enjoy the most and tend to read the most of. I think I've actually read a little bit more romance this year than I have fantasy, but it's like almost even. So I am going to be making a fantasy version of this video in a few weeks time, so stay tuned for that. But like I said, today is all about romance, and I have gone through all of the books that I've read so far this year, specifically in the first 6 months of the year, and I narrowed it down to my top 10 romances, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. I've also put them in order, so number 10 will be my 10th favorite and number 1 will be my absolute favorite romance book I've read so far this year. I just thought it'd be fun to kind of rank them a bit, and it also gives you guys a better indication of like which ones I loved more, because I loved all of these. I think all of these are 5-star, maybe like 2 of them are like a 4.5, but even the ones that are in 10th place, 9th place, 8th place, even though they are lower in the rankings, obviously they are still absolute favorites of mine, and I would recommend every single book that I'm going to be talking about in this video. And just a little disclaimer, obviously we are not all going to agree on all of these books. I'm sure some of you hated some of the books that I loved, but that's just how reading works. We all have different opinions and different reading experiences, and that's actually really fun and really beautiful. These books all mean something to me, and I had a connection of some kind with all of these books. So that being said, please be nice in the comments. Feel free to let me know what your favorite book is, especially if it's one that I haven't read yet. I would love to know. But let's just jump straight into it. Starting off in 10th place, we have You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogle. I think I read this in January, either January or February. And I feel like this is more of like a 4.5 star read for me, because even though I had so much fun with it, I didn't love the first half, but I feel like the first half was necessary, and I understand why the author did it that way so that the second half could be what it was. And so that's why it's more of a 4.5, because I didn't love the first half, but I loved the second half, and I understand why the first half was needed for the second half. If you don't know what this book is about, it's about a couple who are engaged and they are planning their wedding, but their relationship is just not going very well. And we are reading from the girl's perspective, and she is just like, she's just not happy, and she's basically just thinking, I don't think I should marry this guy, like I'm really unsure about this. But she also doesn't want to be the one to end the relationship, specifically because there are lots of things to do with the wedding that will fall back on her if she pulls out. So her plan is to make her fiance end the engagement, end the relationship, and then like nothing is on her, it's not her fault. So you kind of follow her along as she is trying to basically sabotage their relationship, and some things are just so stupid, and she acts like a child some of the time, which I know is a complaint about this book, but it's just like a silly goofy time. Like she's playing pranks on him and she's just being so annoying. It really reminded me of Andy in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, how she's trying to sabotage the relationship, get Ben to break up with her, so she's just like doing the most annoying things. Like that is what this book is. Obviously still a very different plot to How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, but it gives the same vibes, and that's one of my favorite movies. So if it's one of your favorite movies, I definitely recommend reading this. In 9th place we have Things We Hide from the Light by Lucy Score. This is the second book in the Knock 'Em Out trilogy. The third one is coming out so soon, and I am so excited. I think I initially rated this 5 stars, and I do, like looking back, I think it is more of a 4.5, but I still absolutely loved it. And I also think I liked it more than the first book in this series, which is a very uncommon opinion based on what I've heard from other people. It seems like most people liked Things We Never Got Over, which is the first book in the series, more than they liked this one, but I actually felt the opposite. I really liked our characters in this book a lot. I loved Nash and I loved Lena. Like I think they were just the perfect characters in this book. Obviously if you haven't read the first book in this series, I would definitely recommend reading that one first. I don't think you necessarily have to, because they are interconnected standalones, but they do connect, and you will ruin things if you go straight into this one and don't read the first one. And the first one is really good. I think I also rated that one 4.5 when I read it last year. But if you don't know about this series, it is a small town romance series. The first book follows Knox and Naomi, and this book follows Knox's brother Nash and Lena. Nash is the police chief in Knock 'Em Out, and he's also just known for being such a good guy. Like he's just the nice guy, but he went through some things at the end of the first book that kind of traumatized him, and now he is dealing with the effects of that. And Lena is an old friend of Knox, and she has come to Knock 'Em Out to do some research and to look into some things. Her job is so cool, and also just the person she is. She is super confident, super bold, just like the epitome of a cool girl, and I loved her. So I guess it's a bit of like a good guy, bad girl kind of trope. But if you want to know some of the other tropes, we also have small town, a bit of enemy enemies to lovers, I say that lightly. We also have forced proximity, and there's also a great dog component, which I absolutely loved. I definitely think it's worth giving it a shot. I love small town romance, and this series is like top tier small town to me. In 8th place, we have Funny You Should Ask by Alyssa Sussman. I feel like the general consensus of this book is that it's like good but not great, but I freaking loved this. I feel like everyone I see read it is like 3.5 stars. Like, it's good, it's fine, but I love this book so much. I started it one random afternoon and I binged the entire thing that day. I can't explain to you even like why I feel so strongly about this. It is not really necessarily anything crazy. It didn't like rip my heart out or like make me cry or anything like that, but I just had such a good time with this. This is another one that's like more of a rom-com sort of vibe. It's a bit of a second chance. Then in our timeline, we're following an extremely famous actor and a girl who interviewed him. So they did the interview when they were both, I think, in their 20s, and it starts off as just a very like normal interview, and then it kind of extends into them just like spending this weekend or like a few days together, where she's like technically doing this interview, but it's really like them kind of getting to know each other, hanging out, just doing such fun things together. They go to parties together, they go to events together, and obviously they spend a lot of time together over this one weekend. And then something happens and our main character Shani just like doesn't hear anything from this guy for a really long time, and now it's 10 years later and they have met up again to recreate this iconic interview from 10 years ago. So it's technically again like a work thing, but obviously they have all this history and there's this like animosity between them, and it's a bit awkward, but you can tell there's still chemistry, and it kind of goes from there. And I think one of the critiques from this is like, can you really fall in love with someone after spending just a few days together? Which I completely understand. I think that's such a valid critique of this book. But the way it was written, I was just so entranced by this. I felt like I was there. I felt like I saw every single scene in my head play out. Obviously, it is a bit of a whirlwind romance, but I feel like I got like sucked up into it too. Like, tell me why I fell in love with this guy in the one weekend we saw of him as well. I don't know how Alyssa Sussman wrote it, but like I was so consumed by this book. Like, I just ate it up. So obviously you have the then timeline where there's no animosity and there's no awkwardness between them. And then you have the now timeline where they're like figuring stuff out, and it's so good the way it goes back and forth between those two situations. I just think it was written so well. I don't know how to explain it, but the way it was written, I just wanted to keep reading. I couldn't put it down, which is weird because it's not like a thriller where it's like I need to know what's going to happen next, but I felt that way. I think Alyssa Sussman's writing is just perfect to me. Obviously, like I said, I feel like this is like a 3 to 4 star read for a lot of people, so I can't promise you'll feel the same way about it that I did, but I hope that you do, and I hope that you love it as much as I did, because it was just so good to me. In spot number 7, we have Some Kind of Perfect by Krista and Becca Ritchie. I really hesitated in including this in my list because it is the last book in a very long series, and so it's hard to recommend this because obviously you can't go straight into this one. You need to read the first book, and I hate to tell you this, besties, but this is the 10th book. Yeah, 10th book in the series. So there's a lot of books you have to read before you get to this point. But this was such a great read to me. I feel like some of you might be shocked that this actually doesn't have a higher ranking, but I feel like the reason why this one is in 7th place is because this is the epilogue novel. So we're really just getting little snippets of what the characters are doing for many years after the actual series ends. And it's obviously very chunky, so you do see a lot of what the characters are up to, but there's no real plot. It's just kind of like almost a collection of short stories of random things and random events in the characters' lives after the series ends, which I love, don't get me wrong, because I was obsessed with the characters. I'm so glad I got to see more of them, but I just feel like I can't rank it any higher because it really was just like little snippets here and there of this family just living their life, doing sometimes very mundane things. It didn't like rip my heart out. I wasn't like obsessed. I just was like, wow, this was such a great conclusion to this series. If you don't know what series I'm referring to, it is called the Addicted/Calloway Sisters series. It is so popular. I know so many people love it, but it's actually made up of 2 series that you kind of read together. So obviously look up the reading order to make it easy for you. But the series starts off following 2 characters, Lily and Lo, and as the series progresses, it extends to following 4 more characters. So you follow 6 characters in total, and you follow them through years of their lives, and you really see them all go through it. Like, a lot of them face some pretty bad situations, some trauma, addiction, recovery. There's so much discussed in this series, but it is the epitome of found family. I don't think I've ever read found family as good as the Addicted Unrelated / Calloway Sisters series, and found family is my favorite trope of all time. Like, if you tell me something has great found family, you best believe it's on my wish list. Like, I love found family. I just don't think there's anything better. In 6th place, we have When in Rome by Sarah Adams. I don't have the physical copy because I've lent it out to a friend, but this was such an easy 5-star for me. It was so good. It is another rom-com, so just like a silly, goofy time, but in my opinion, it is the perfect rom-com. It had the perfect amount of romance, the perfect amount of comedy. I actually laughed at the things that were supposed to be funny, which doesn't always happen in a rom-com. It felt a little cheesy, but not too cheesy. It had depth to it. It was also set in a small town, so you get to see the other characters in the small town, which I always freaking love. And it just had a good plot. This was another one that I just sat down and binged, and I read in probably like 2 or 3 sittings. It's also really short. It's super easy to read. I always recommend this to people if they just want like a fun romance. And it also has little to no spice, and I'm pretty sure all of Sarah Adams' books are like that. If you don't know what this one is about, it is about a famous singer who is about to go on tour, but she's feeling very overwhelmed by just like everything in her life, by the public lifestyle that she lives, by her schedule just being so packed with tour dates, rehearsals, all of that sort of stuff. And she is just like, I can't do this anymore. I need a break. So she decides to escape to Rome, but rather than Rome, Italy, she goes to Rome, Kentucky, which is a small town. And her car just happens to break down in front of this guy's house, and he comes out to help her, and that's kind of like their meet cute, and things go from there. But yeah, I loved this book. It was such a feel-good story. Like I said, still had depth, still had plot, but it was just a beautiful romance, and yeah, I loved everything about it. I really can't critique it at all. Moving on, in 5th place, we have Heartbreak House Share. This book was such a pleasant surprise to me. This was one of those books that I just like walked into the bookstore. I was just looking at the books. I saw this cover. I was like, that's a cute cover. Picked it up, bought it, brought it home. Had no expectations going into this. I hadn't heard anyone talk about it. It doesn't have that many reviews on Goodreads, so I didn't really know what to expect going into it. And it was so good. I literally loved it. This is technically a romance, but I do want to say it definitely isn't as much of a romance as some of these other books. I would almost argue that it's like a general fiction book with a great romance subplot, because don't get me wrong, the romance in this book is so good, but to me it did feel like more of a subplot, and I'm not going to complain because I love romance subplots. I think sometimes romance subplots are better than actual romance books themselves, but I would say the main focus of this book is basically just trying to navigate your 20s. It kind of reminded me of Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton, but that one is non-fiction, it's a memoir, and this one is obviously fiction, totally made up. But in this story we follow Flick, who is a journalist, and she has just been broken up with by her long-term boyfriend, who I think she was dating for around 4 years, lived with him for 2 years, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And she is obviously devastated. She really thought that this was the guy she was going to marry. She really thought her life was like heading in a good direction, and then it just kind of felt like the rug was pulled out from under her, and she just doesn't know what to do. So obviously, because she lived with her boyfriend, she had to move out, and she decides to move into a house share, or we call them share houses here in Australia, basically the same thing, with 3 other girls. I think they're all in their 20s as well, and she had never met them before. She just kind of finds her listing online and applies for it. She gets it, she moves in. She's really nervous about it, but it ends up being such a great decision, and you just follow her as she goes through her life, as she makes decisions, as she watches the people around her also make completely different decisions, but none of those decisions are necessarily wrong. They're all just on totally different timelines. And the way this book just showcases so beautifully what it's like to be in your 20s and not know what you're doing, and being so confused and just trying to like wing it, basically. I just loved it. And again, because you get to see all of the side characters doing just like totally different things and being on a totally different path than our main character, it also just so beautifully showcases how different everyone's lives are in their 20s. So I just really loved this. Again, like I said, the romance in this book is actually phenomenal, and the guy in this book that she falls in love with, I am obsessed with him. He was so sweet. So I definitely recommend this book. I feel like it is so underrated. In 4th place, we have Powerless by Elsie Silver. This book is the 3rd book in the Chestnut Spring series. There is currently 4 books. There's gonna be 5. I honestly recommend the series as a whole, and I would recommend going in order. The first book is Flawless. I guess you don't have to technically go in order because they are all kind of interconnected standalones, but I would recommend going in order. I feel like this series is so popular, but if you haven't heard about it, it is a cowboy romance series. If someone had told me a few years ago that I would be obsessed with a cowboy romance, I don't know if I would have believed them, but here we are. In saying that, this book specifically follows Jasper and Sloane, and Jasper, although he's like part-time cowboy, he is also a professional hockey player. So in this book, you kind of get some of him being a cowboy, but you also get a lot of him kind of just being a hockey player. And Sloane is a professional ballerina. So I guess it's a bit of a sports romance. It's also a road trip romance, forced proximity, friends to lovers, definitely. I don't know how to explain it, but Jasper is something else. I feel like most of the time when I read a romance, I can appreciate our male main character. Like I can think he's super sweet and super caring and think he's a great guy and just obviously enjoy the romance. But it takes a lot for me to also have a crush on the male main character. And this man gives me butterflies. I don't know why, I don't know how, I don't know what it is about Jasper, but I definitely have a crush on Jasper Jervis. There, I said it, I admit it. I feel like a lot of you already knew it, but like, I feel like every time I talk about this book or talk about Jasper, I get a bit nervous, which is so dumb because he does not exist. But the way he just acts, the way he talks, the way he treats Sloane, I love it. He is just your classic, shy, mysterious, there's more to him kind of guy. Like, to everyone else, he comes across a bit grumpy, a bit standoffish, I guess. But when you get to know him, he is so sweet and so lovely and is quite protective. And I just loved him. So definitely loved Powerless. I will say there is a lot of spice in this series, which is probably my only critique. It was just a bit much for me personally, but that's also just like a personal preference thing. But I thought I would just let you guys know. In third place, we have Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This book was phenomenal. I loved it so much. I have read every book that Abby Jimenez has published so far, and all of them but one have been 4 stars or higher. Like, I love her books. And if you look at the ratings in order of like release date, the book that I didn't really like was her debut novel, and then I gave 4 stars to her second book, 5 stars to her third book, 5 stars to her fourth book, and 5 stars to this book, which is her 5th book. I feel like her writing and her stories and her characters just get better and better. I don't know how she does it, but I am just obsessed with so many of her books. I think she just kills it. She is also another example of someone who does rom-coms so well. I feel like she just does the perfect balance of like funny, light-hearted, feel good, but always manages to add some sort of plot point that has a lot of depth to it and ends up being a really great way for us to be able to understand her characters really, really well, and also just get us super attached to the story, to the characters, to all of it. And like I said, I think this is my favorite book of hers so far. This book follows Bree and Jacob. They're both doctors who work at the same hospital, but Jacob has just moved to the hospital that Bree works at. And they kind of get off on the wrong foot, and Jacob wants to apologize. So he sends her a little note just apologizing, and Bree responds to that note with a note of her own, and it kind of starts this little back and forth between our 2 main characters. And the story kind of goes from there. Like I said, there is definitely so much depth to this story. Bree's brother is going through some health issues, so that is a really like large component of the story, which was really beautiful but also difficult to read. And Jacob struggles with social anxiety, and the way social anxiety was represented in this book is the best I have ever seen it being represented. This book is dual POV, so you get to be in both of our main characters' heads. And reading from Jacob's POV, I was like, did you take these thoughts out of my brain? I feel like Jacob was the perfect example to show how social anxiety can manifest in someone's life and what it looks like from the outside, and also what it looks like from the inside, because you're reading from his head, but then you're also reading from Bree's head. It was also a great example of what dating and what relationships look like when one person is struggling with social anxiety, which I really appreciated. Brianna is so compassionate and so understanding, and I loved seeing her interact with Jacob specifically in those anxious moments. And I just loved this book. It was wholesome, it was sweet, it was deep and insightful, and still so feel good. Abby Jimenez killed it. Moving on to our top 2 spots, I had such a hard time choosing which one of these was going to be number 1 and which one was going to be number 2, because both of these books mean so much to me. So much to me. So I almost want to say that they are tied first place, but I feel like that's just not fun. So I have managed to rank them, but just so you know, these are so close together in how I see them and how much I love them that they almost could be tied. So that being said, our number 2 spot goes to Happy Place by Emily Henry. It's just so funny to me because I went into this book expecting to have a good time, expecting to enjoy it, but I did not expect it to have the effect on me that it did. The day that this was released, I actually downloaded it on my Kindle because I was like, oh, I'm sure I'll enjoy it, but I don't need a physical copy of this book. That's how you know I didn't think I was going to be obsessed with it, because I didn't think I needed a physical copy. And I think I finished it maybe like 2 or 3 days later. And let me tell you, when I say I sobbed my way through that book, I sobbed my way through that book. And it's so funny to me because I have had multiple friends read this book and I've said to them, oh my gosh, like, did you cry? And they're like, no, why would I cry? And I'm just kind of like, oh, okay. I guess we didn't have the same experience. It seems to me that there are 3 common reactions that I get from people when I ask them their feelings on this book. 1 being the people who just like didn't really enjoy it, didn't really care for it, didn't really see the hype. 2 being the group of people who really enjoyed it, thought it was a great romance, had a lot of fun with it. They gave it a really high rating, they loved it, they just thought it was a fantastic romance. And 3, the group of people that I am also a part of, and that group are the people who sobbed their way through this book. It felt like a personal attack. I have never read a book where it so perfectly encapsulated how they feel about things, how they express their emotions, how they relate to things. Like, I just can't believe that there are such different reactions to the same story. Like, we all read read the same book, and so many of us have just such different experiences. And I think that's really fun and really beautiful, and that is just like what reading is, and that's the way it works. But after having such an emotional experience reading this book, I was just so shocked that other people just thought it was like a cute rom-com, because I was like, what? You're saying that you didn't feel personally attacked and read quotes where you just like sobbed because they so perfectly described a feeling that you felt so many times? What do you mean? So all that to say, that was my experience reading Happy Place. I absolutely adored it. I think it is one of the best books I have ever read. I feel like it put on paper so many thoughts and so many feelings that I have experienced. I related so much to Harriet specifically, but also aspects of Wynne as well. I don't think I've ever related so much to two characters in my entire life. It's wild to me, but I need to stop talking about this book. I've been talking about it for way too long, but those are my thoughts on Happy Place. I loved it so much. And if you haven't already guessed it, that means our top spot goes to Daisy Hates The Great Undoing, the 4th book in the Magnolia Park series. The only reason why the other books aren't in the number 1 spot is because I read them last year. I didn't read them this year, but I did read this book in March, and it broke me. I really don't know how to explain why I love this series so much, because it's toxic, it's messy, there are so many tropes that I wouldn't normally like. A lot of the characters are really unlikable, but I am obsessed. If you haven't heard of Magnolia Parks, it's basically Gossip Girl but set in London. We're following a group of characters who live in high society London, who are trust fund babies. They have so much money, their parents are all loaded, they went to boarding school, and now they're in their 20s and they are all just being messy basically. But it is so addicting to read. And honestly, I don't know which book in the series is my favorite. I think I honestly love them all equally, which is so bizarre. Usually I have a very clear favorite within a series, but I can't pick. I love all of these books so much. And again, like I've already said, I don't even know why these books affect me the way that they do, but I am utterly obsessed. These people feel so real to me, and the way that Jessa Hastings writes, I can't get over it. I can't explain it, but it is so beautiful and so poetic. The way she describes what it feels like to love someone, I don't know how she is able to do it, because it is so beautiful. In saying that, I know that this series is not for everyone. I know a lot of people don't like this series, and that is so fine, but obviously I'm just talking about the books that I love, and this book, I love it. I love it so much. I do feel like the Daisy Hates books have a bit more plot than the Magnolia Parks books do, but overall the books are kind of just like no plot, just vibes for the most part. You're kind of just following the characters along as they make mistakes and they figure things out and they just live their lives. Like, it's not really, there's not a lot of plot going on, but I love them so much. I am so obsessed. I cannot wait for the next book to come out. I think it's coming out early 2024. I'm so excited. But those are all the books that I have to talk about in this video. I hope you enjoyed seeing my top 10 romance books that I've read so far this year in the first 6 months of this year. Hopefully the second half of this year is full of even more amazing romance books. I can't wait to pick up so many other books and see how I feel about them. I would love to know what your favorite romance book that you've read this year is, and let me know if any of these intrigue you, if you're going to pick up any of them, or if you have any recommendations for me, because I'm always looking for more recommendations, of course. But I love you guys so much. I hope you all have a fantastic day or night whenever you're watching this, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.